The Baldwin County Public School System, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensaw in 1799. And at that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. And in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County Public School System boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. And as time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original and historic public schoolhouses which distinguished Baldwin County, beginning in 1799, as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama. Located in South Baldwin County, Foley High School's essential history began in a one-room schoolhouse in 1908. Students in grades 1 through 11 came from Foley, Roscoe, Rosedale, Magnolia Springs, Bon Secour, Union, Yupon, and Mifflin to receive an education in the continually expanding building. In 1918, a two-story brick building was erected from which the first senior class graduated in 1922. 2 years later, a new 5-room building was constructed and the school was officially named Foley High School. As time progressed to the 1970s, the school was split into 4 separate schools, each with its own faculty, administration, and staff. The facility then built a new library, gym, and science wing for the structure. The year 1989 provided for a new Foley High School, as the former became the middle school for Foley students, and the former middle school supplied room for the 4th and 5th graders to leave the elementary school. Foley High School opened in its current location on Pride Drive in time for school to start in the fall of 1990. Today, this location remains the home for educational enlightenment to many students in Foley and the surrounding area, and continues to exist not only as a landmark in Baldwin County, but as an important place for students of the community to learn and grow.
That is Foley High School. And it too was built in 1927, but it was not built to the standard school plan because of the influence of one local trustee. And he was Dr. Sibley Holmes. And to explain to you his influence on that building, we would have to go back to a previous building. It was the first masonry structure. It wasn't the first school in Foley, but the first masonry building, which came to be known locally as the old 2-story building, was constructed because the 3 local town members who were school trustees were willing to stake their personal fortunes on the bond issue. And Dr. Holmes and Mr. Bowler and Mr. Holk personally signed it was like giving a mortgage on all that property to back the bond issue, the county bond issue that built that school. And because these were such active people and they went to such great extent, to gain a good school building, their power as trustees and prestige as trustees grew to a greater extent than did trustees in other school systems. They had a little more power over their choice of teachers, over all school affairs than did other schools. They just exerted more influence because they was just so interested in the place. But Dr. Sibley Holmes, being the physician that he was, maintained that many of our health problems in the communities were caused by the fact that school rooms were overheated. The average school room in those days had a pot-bellied stove in it, generally with a jacket around it, a steel jacket around it, so that it didn't get so hot if a child fell into it, he wouldn't be fatally burned. But and the majority of the women, the majority of teachers in those days were women. And women didn't dress in those days as we dress nowadays. They didn't dress as warmly in winter. And consequently, the teacher was always cold, and the students were overheated. It just generally occurred. You could walk in a classroom in those days, a typical winter classroom, and the teacher would be perfectly comfortable, and the kids would have the tongues out. And Dr. Sibley Holmes said he wasn't going to have a school built where kids couldn't get fresh air, and he wouldn't have inside corridors. He said that at least once an hour, when classes changed from room to room in a high school, he wanted his kids to have a little bit of fresh air. And then the people that came along and were principal of that high school noticed that there was a tremendous difference in discipline in a class where kids could be outside as much as possible. Discipline in an enclosed environment is a problem in any school anywhere. Noise, confusion, if they're jammed close together. But we found that we could have lockers in close proximity to each other outside, and the noise didn't bother anybody. And to Dr. Holmes' satisfaction, at least once an hour they had a breath of fresh air. And W. Candler McGowan became principal of Foley High School during World War II. And he later became superintendent of Baldwin County Schools. And he knew what it was like to serve in both kinds of schools. He'd been in schools that had outside corridors, and he'd been in schools that had inside corridors. And when he was going to build them, he was going to build them like Dr. Holmes built them. And I followed him at Foley. And I followed not far down the line as superintendent. But in the meantime, I was in charge of buildings and transportation. And I believed in the outside corridors. And you can see that influence on all of the school buildings that he and I and we and the superintendents in between. We built schools. We built schools with open corridors, and they had great advantages. But in later years, we learned they had disadvantages. The main one was when it became possible to air condition schools, it was very difficult to air condition the ones with outside corridors. If you opened the door, your cool air escaped. And there was so much more space that was exposed to the outdoors for radiation. It is much more expensive to air condition. But on those old school rooms, we never had any problems with mildew and mold. And nowadays, when we are building schools, and we're building them with the idea that they will be climate controlled. We don't dare shut one down now for any reason. You can't shut one of our new high schools down in the summertime. If you do, it mildews inside, and your computers melt. So we have to maintain climate control 12 months in a year now, and so we're back to the expense again. So each system has its advantages. Right now, Dr. Holmes would be horrified that our kids are that many kids are in an enclosed space 6 hours a day without relief to outside air. He would be horrified. But those of us who look back on the hot days and look at the cool rooms, but in the old days, we didn't have as long school terms, and we didn't try to operate schools in August nor June. Now we do, because we can, because they are cooled. We take longer vacations than we did in the old days. But each has its advantages and disadvantages. Today we fight mold and mildew and upper respiratory diseases. And in the old days we fought heat, but we never had mold and mildew. So I'm saying that the construction of Old Foley High School, now known as Foley Middle School, and I understand will be raised in a couple of years, it influenced architecture for the next 50 years in Baldwin County schools because of the people who moved through Foley schools and came into school administration at the county level.
Like most of the communities in Baldwin County, the Foley schools began in homes. There were actually 88 to 92 school districts in Baldwin County, and the Foley one was one of those school districts and had its own school board in the area. The schools were usually 1 to 2 room and were about 2 miles apart in the community, and the oldest building that we have in Foley is a 1907 wooden structure, and it was first a little bit north of where it's located today, and the building was a 1 through 8 school to start with, and then was moved to the campus of the high school area, and is actually still in use today. Beautiful one-room building that has served many purposes throughout its life. That building was used on the Foley campus for grades 1 through 12 to start with, and in 1917, the local school board had some very forward-thinking members. Dr. Holmes was one of them, Mr. J.B. Foley was one, and their local school board decided to really build the best school in Baldwin County. And J.B. Foley gave the land for the school, which is located at the present location of the Foley Middle School. They built a 2-story building, and the caption at the bottom of that building, written in beautiful white ink, says, "The best school in Baldwin County," in Foley, Alabama. The school served grades 1 through 12, but at the same time, the wooden building was being used sometimes for elementary classrooms, and then sometimes, mostly, it was used for the agricultural program. In fact, Foley had such an emphasis on vocational education and home economics. They were the first school in Baldwin County to apply for the money from the Smith-Hughes Act, which was a 1917 act, and the school was actually named Baldwin County Agricultural School. We are fortunate to have some of the documents and some of the memorabilia from the days when Baldwin County Agricultural School was the name of the school, and we have diplomas, and we actually have the yearbook from the very first class, 1917, the first graduating class of 10 students. The yearbook was named the Satsuma which indicates the emphasis on the farming in the area. The local community raised $2,500 between 1917 and 1919 to purchase equipment to furnish the agricultural building. They bought tools for the young men to use and sewing machines for the girls to use in home economics. That is an amazing thing to me, that $2,500 was raised in a small little fledgling town in the late part of the teens in 1900. In 1924, the population had grown so, and the school system, of course, was adding some funds to the local money at this time. In 1924, the one-story high school was built. Now, you realize that any school that's grades 1 through 12 is called a high school. So when you say Foley High School, it means grades 1 through 12. And until very recently, one principal would actually be in charge of all grades 1 through 12, and then there would be teaching principals or assistant principals in charge of the different levels, even if they were housed in a different building. But the one-story building that is currently Foley Middle School was built in 1924, and Dr. Leslie Smith was one of the earliest teachers and principals in the school who is able to tell us precious, precious memories of the days in the one-story Foley High School.
John Snook was the head of the telephone company. And John Snook was a unique individual. He was one of the brightest people that I've ever known, engineering-wise. He was, matter of fact, I believe John was a genius in many ways. But John had his own ways of doing things. He was thoroughly frightened by the fact that his father, who had established the Gulf telephone system in Foley, was left without any manpower during World War II to run his system. Only women were available during World War II to the telephone system. And John was convinced that there was going to be another war, and he was not going to be caught short. So he employed only female employees in his telephone system, and he taught them to do all of the things that men do, with one exception. The women did not have the strength to climb the telephone poles using the leg irons that you would just walk up a telephone pole with. And he began to think about ways that and machinery that led to the present bucket truck. And John had all of his telephone equipment was surplus World War II material. And he had these old trucks with booms on the back of them, and he had it designed so one of his ladies, one of his women could step in a little stirrup at the bottom and be lifted up with a boom most of the way up the telephone pole. Once she was up there, she could get off and do everything that men did, and then he would let them back down. Well, I had become principal at Foley High School in the fall of 1953, and we were building the third new wing to the high school, just to the north of the present one. It's part of the school now. We were building it that summer, and the school's flagpole was in the way of the new construction, and it had to come down. And there was nothing in the contract about putting up the new flagpole. But I, being a new principal, I was going to have a flag flying on the first day that I opened my school. So I got the janitor to dig me a hole out in front of the school, and he was a little over-ambitious. Instead of digging the small hole that I wanted him to dig, he dug one that would be measured by feet. It probably would hold a couple of cubic yards of concrete. And the idea was that we would stick the pole down there and pour concrete around. I had an idea of of a bushel basket size hole, but he didn't know when to quit digging. And I talked to the local contractor about some excess concrete that he might have that I wanted him to fill that hole with. He agreed that as a goodwill gesture, he'd put up my flagpole. But the school was fast approaching, and school wasn't more than a week away. And I got called away to the county office for a meeting. When I went back, the flagpole had been put up in at least 2 cubic yards of concrete, but they forgot to put the roller on the top of the flagpole that would hoist the flag up and down. So I have a bare flagpole and from that cemented in 2 cubic yards of concrete. Well, the first thing I did was hire a little boy to see if he could climb it. But it was one of these graduated flagpoles. It was big here, reduced in size, and the last run up there was quite small. And when he got up close to the top up there, it began to bend, and I had to call him down. So I had a dilemma, and I did what everybody else did in Foley at that time. When you got in trouble, you went to John Snook and asked him for help. I had in mind one of his boom trucks and one of his ladies that he would just lift up to that flagpole and put that roller up there for me. Well, I started to leave school for lunch one day at noon, and this command car, which was one of his personal transportation vehicles, old Dodge command car, driven by one of his ladies and another on the front seat, and John sitting up on the back seat next to another, and they come bumping over the curb and drive up to the flagpole, and another one just like it comes from the other direction. And then a 6x6 truck arrives up and bumps over the flagpole. In a minute or two, I had every vehicle and all of the personnel for the whole Gulf telephone system assembled on my front lawn. And Al, what's going on? John, I'm going to move your flag. I'm going to take your flagpole down. Well, John, how you going to do it? Well, he said, I'm going to dynamite it. And he reaches in his back pocket and he pulls out 2 sticks of dynamite. And he's got the caps in his pocket. John, no, we can't do this. No, look at this old 2-story building down here. And it's got a crack right down the center. John, you can't do that. Oh, no, it's not going to be a problem. And about that time, another vehicle arrives, and out hops a couple of ladies, and they had this wooden box with a T-handle on the top of it. And another 2 come out with a roll of wire. And they go up here, and another would jump out, and they start boring with augers and boring down under this flagpole. And John takes his knife out, and he cuts the dynamite in half. He's going to use 2 sticks, but he has a cut in 4, going to do it in 4 pieces. And he gouges in that dynamite with his knife point, and he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this detonator cap, and he puts the cord in it, and he bites it with his teeth and crimps it, and then they start shoving it down in those holes. I'm desperate. And but finally there was just nothing that I could do except back up behind the pine tree. We were not even going to have anybody flagging traffic. I thought I could at least flag traffic before he dynamited the building down. Well, everything is ready, and they back up a little bit, and down comes the plunger, and it said, poof, and that old block of concrete rose gently up, transferred itself to one side, and that flagpole leaned gently over to the ground. Out hops somebody else with a hacksaw, and they cut that flagpole off, and then one of these big 6x6 backs up to that big chunk of concrete, lets down the boom, and tightened down on it, and the front end of the truck reared up. Well, they backed another one up to it, did the same thing, and lo and behold, the front end of that truck, they backed the third one up from the other direction. It's to that, and that time, that was the magic charm. It took 3 trucks, 3 lifts, and between them, they cleared the ground with that hunk of concrete. And then that first truck went off down through the city of Foley, the streets, city of Foley. Behind it, a 2 cubic yard concrete and 2 trucks being pulled backwards behind it, and they go off to the city dump. But I had a flagpole in place with a flag flying the first day of school.
At this time, the 2-story building was still standing right next to the 1-story high school, and it was used as an elementary school. It would be grades 1 through 7 or 1 through 8, depending on the student population at that time. And the old elementary building that was 2-story was located where the library was later built on the Foley High School and later middle school campus. The building, of course, had no running water. There were outhouses there, and there were wooden kegs that were kept in the hall downstairs with a spigot at the bottom, and so that the kids would have fresh water to drink. Some of them said it was even cool, which I'm not sure about that. But there was an auditorium upstairs on that, and was used for many, many school events at that time. In the 1930s, the whole county, of course, was suffering from the Depression, but Foley, being the forward city that it is, took the bull by the horns and did a lot of innovative work in the 1930s to be able to provide this kind of schooling for their children that they wanted. They applied for federal emergency public works funds, and a new agriculture and home economics brick building was built on the campus of the high school. There is a plaque on that building today designating that it was one of the New Deal era buildings and was designated as a Roosevelt project. Behind the school and next to the school, 5 acres were given by J.B. Foley to be able to build homes or houses for the principals and for teachers. Those buildings were rented to employees and were used to entice employees to come. There are still 2 of those buildings standing on the Foley campus, and one of the residents has been living in that building for many, many years.
We moved in here. Like I said, the books, they had stored books in here for about 5 years, I think. So my husband can do just about anything. So later on, there was these floors in here and the floors in the dining room. It was built like I guess most of older houses are built. And it was probably built, we're not really sure, I'd like to know when exactly, but probably in the 20s, I've been told probably in the 20s. But it was living room, dining room, and kitchen, and then bedroom, bath, and 2 bedrooms. And the floors were nice in here in the dining room. They were nice. They're hardwood floors. In fact, I think my husband said maybe the doors, of course the doors were painted white, so we didn't know, but he thought they might even have been mahogany. They had 2 fireplaces, and both of the fireplace in the living room had been painted with brick, but it was painted white. And what do you call the thing over the fireplace? The mantle was it was painted white too. So over the years I had painted it and took the white paint, and I think it's probably just pine in here. But like I said, the walls on everything within the living room were like, you know, school green. The floors were just regular like boards. And so we put carpet down in here. This is the second carpet we've had. We had the first one for about 30 years, I think. Bud and the kids and I, we all helped put paneling in the living room and wallpaper in the bathroom and the kids' rooms. Rusty actually stayed in the room that I'd mentioned that Coach Mr. Rich's son had lived in, and then the middle room, Ricky put her baby bed in there first because, like I said, she was just tiny. But the house is old enough that we know that they probably had a wood heater at one time in the kitchen because there were flues, or maybe wood heaters. There was a flue in between Rusty and Ricky's room. And there's also a flue in the kitchen. And if you can make a picture from the outside or see it from the outside, you can see there's 3 chimneys. They had covered up the 2. We used the one in the living room, the fireplace in the living room, for about 5 years. And they're separate. The ones between, there's 2 fireplaces, one in the living room and one in the dining room, but they're not, they're divided by brick in there. And I think where the flues were in the children's room, I think they actually at some point in time came and covered them over. But they left this one so we could use it. And then my husband put a wood heater. Goodness, I don't remember how long after we lived here, but he built a wood heater, and we use that for our heat. There are 2 floor furnaces that we used when we first moved in, were gas, but we didn't use them after a year or so. We just went with the fireplace and then the wood heaters. But that's what heats our house. One of the most rewarding things about being here and living here as long as we have, and my husband coaching here with Coach Smith, and both of them being godly men and influencing. I've always felt like that a coach a lot of times would have more of influence on a young person than even their pastor, because so many kids look to my husband and to Coach Smith as a leader, as an example. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things is when I'll start crying telling these. I'm sorry. I cry easily. You're going to cut that out, can't you? But you want me to start over? But one of the most rewarding things is that when they will come back and just tell them, how much they appreciate. Some of them, they looked at him like a daddy almost, that they were a father figure to him, and appreciate some of the stand they took, and that they were godly coaches, and they always led them in the right way. But I've always told my husband he need to run for an office, because everybody knows him no matter where we are. Here or anywhere else, there's been some funny experiences where anywhere around this area, he goes in and somebody will come in and Coach Pigott. Somebody will come in, Coach Pigott. It'll be a student that he knows. But one time we were at a Christian motorcycle rally out from Fort Worth, Texas. And we had just ridden our motorcycle. We'd trailered it out there, and then we'd ridden out to the grounds. And we just got off our motorcycle, stepped off the motorcycle, took our helmets off, and someone said, "Coach Pigott." And it was a boy that had gone to school here, actually, Bubba Blackwell. And he was actually on the program. But what in the world are you doing here? So anywhere we go, and that's happened in other places. We've been in the mountains or somewhere like that, and we'll meet somebody we know. But like I said, that's always been, to me, is very rewarding, the fact that I know that my husband has made a difference, not only as a coach and as a teacher. We've taken, young people to church with us. We had to go travel all back in the 70s, and we'd load it up and take kids to church with us. And so that's been one of the advantages. When Ricky was little, like I said, she was only 3 weeks old when we moved here, and we'd go, back then they had just like little infant seats, and I would put her in the infant seat and take her to, we never had a babysitter. They all went to all the Rusty, and of course Rusty was usually out on the football field with his dad, but Ricky would sleep that first year, all the hollering, carrying on in a football stadium. She would sleep through the whole game. But if we go to away games, we had a car where her little infant seat would fit right in between the 2 front seats, and we'd pile the cheerleaders. A lot of times we'd take the cheerleaders with us and take them to the games with us. So.
Well, me and my wife moved here in 1968, I guess, and I taught 2 years down in Florida, and then I came back, and I went to an alumni meeting. My old head coach at Southern Mississippi was the speaker that night at the alumni meeting in our county, in Pearl River County, and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he said, "Well, give me your number. I get calls for coaches all the time." So just a few weeks, Coach Ivan Jones, if you know anything about football in South Alabama, anyway, everybody's heard of Ivan Jones. So he called me and we came down and I met with him and Mr. Rich and signed up and been here ever since. I was an assistant, and then Coach Jones left, became a principal, assistant principal at the middle school, and Lester Smith was the head coach, and me and him coached together my whole time here. Me and him were on the staff together. And so I was either coaching with him or teaching with him for 29 years, and he's high on my list of people. There's a lot of other people that came through who were good people that had an abundance of them here at Foley High School, and he's up close to the top in my opinion. And we had some colorful people that came through, and I was thinking one of the stories I was thinking of teachers that came through. Miss Rhonda Stringham, who's now, I think she's at the county level. When she first came to Foley, because she was so young looking, we were having an assembly in the gym, and all the kids, and me and Barry Pennington were standing outside waiting for all the kids to get into the gym, and they all pretty much got in there, and we were standing outside the door, and along here came, they'd already started, and here came this other person, and they kind of stood by us, and Coach Pennington said, there's a seat right in there on that first row right there. And she said, I think I'll just stand here. And he was kind of an authoritative. He said, you don't understand. I'm telling you to get in there and sit down. And she said, but I'm a teacher. So every time I see Rhonda, I think of that story. And a lot of interesting things happened. Of course, you know, you're coaching, you're so caught up in the season. As soon as the season's over, you taking up the stuff and you're looking forward, you're getting ready for the next season. It's just always, and you get caught up in that, and the years roll on by. You know, and our kids grew up. Our daughter was, Ricky was 4 weeks old when we moved to Foley. And anyway, and now she's been teaching, I don't know how long she's been teaching math at the high school, and I'm married to Matt Moran, and we're really proud of our son-in-law and our daughter-in-law. Our son is 2 years older than her, and I know my wife, when he started playing Little League Baseball, we went to one of the first baseball game he played in. My wife said, man, I didn't know these games were so exciting. You know, if you got somebody in the game, it makes it a whole lot different. You know, if you got a dog in the fight, it's a whole lot more interesting as to how it's going to turn out, and makes it more exciting. And then we rocked on, and here we go, and the whole family's involved. My daughter becomes a cheerleader, my son's playing football, and I'm coaching, and my wife Claudia, she's up in the stands. So every game is just, you know, involved for everybody. And those were some exciting times that we went through. Speaking of the people, you know, I think anywhere that you're working, that you feel comfortable with the people you're around. If you respect the people you're around, it just makes it so much better. And I hear people that are working in a situation where it's just, they hate to go to work. But that wasn't at all the way I felt at Foley. I enjoyed the people that I was around, the teachers that I was around, and the coaches. Like I said, to give a story and an example of the character of a Lester Smith. When they first came out with FM radios, two-way radios, the FM two-way radio, you know, a little portable thing. You didn't need the headset. When they first came out, we got one, and we were going to use it for our team. And so we was playing a team, I think, from Mobile. And Lester said, well, let's wait and see and make sure they don't have those. So, you know. And so we start the game, and it's not long until one of the assistants says, Coach, they're on that same channel we're on. And so Lester, here's the character of Lester. He says, all right, box ours up, put it in the box, we're not going to use it. Not to keep them from hearing us, but to keep us from hearing them, so we wouldn't have an advantage, you know, an illegal advantage, which it would be, you know. And so that's the kind of person he is. He didn't want he wanted to win, but not so bad that he'd do something illegal or immoral. So that's the kind of guy he is, and he's a tremendous guy to work with.
In the 6th grade, I had Miss Sybil Underwood. Miss Underwood later became a counselor at Foley for a number of years. The main event for me in the 6th grade was making a scrapbook. She asked us to make a scrapbook. And that was very interesting because I made the scrapbook. The cover of the scrapbook actually was made out of wood, and I had put polyurethane and that sort of thing on it, and put, I can't remember the title of the book, but Foley Schools or Foley High School, and things that we had collected, or the things that had happened to us in the first 11 or 12 years of our life, I guess. And so I collected a bunch of things and even kept that scrapbook for years, and even added to it, and still have the scrapbook today, 50-something years later. One of the teachers that was very memorable at that time also was Mr. Fuller, Olin Fuller. And I'll tell one story about Mr. Fuller. I had plain geometry under him in the 10th grade, and Algebra 2 under him in the 11th grade. I had never had any problems with math prior to having Mr. Fuller. That's not to say that Mr. Fuller was not a good teacher, because he was an excellent teacher, but I'll illustrate the point here in just a minute. During the first 6 weeks, we had 6 weeks at that time instead of 9 weeks, but at the end of the first 6 weeks, I made a 43 in plain geometry. Well, I'd never made a 43 in anything before. I'd always been an A-B student pretty much all the way through school. But Mr. Fuller, I guess, felt sorry for me and gave me a D-, because I had tried real hard. It was just very difficult for me to pick it up. Mr. Fuller covered the material pretty fast. As a matter of fact, those of us who had him would say, of course we didn't say it to him, but we would say from time to time, Mr. Fuller would write with one hand and erase with the other, you know, almost all at the same time. As a matter of fact, the plain geometry book, I still remember it. I remember numbers pretty well, and I remember the plain geometry book was 583 pages long, and he covered that book and still had 3 weeks left in school. So he covered the material pretty fast. So I made a D-. Well, I wound up making a D the first semester and a C the second semester in plain geometry and in Algebra 2. But 24 years later, the interesting thing is he's still teaching at Foley High School, and my son comes along now, Keith, the one that I mentioned a little bit ago. Keith is now a sophomore at Foley High School. Mr. Fuller is still teaching plain geometry and Algebra 2. And I'm an assistant principal at that time at Foley. And when I found out that Keith had Mr. Fuller for plain geometry, I said, oh no. Now his grades are going to drop, because Keith was an A student. He might have made a B once in a while, but he made mostly A's and a B occasionally. And I said, well, here goes Keith's GPA. Well, at the end of the first 6 weeks, the report cards come out, and asked Keith, I said, well, how did you do? And he said, well, I did well. I said, well, how did you do in plain geometry? He said, well, I made an 89. And I said, well, how did you do that? He said, well, Mr. Fuller is a good teacher. And I said, I know Mr. Fuller is a good teacher. I had Mr. Fuller 24 years ago in 1959-60 in plain geometry. I said, I realize Mr. Fuller is a good teacher. He was a good teacher in 1959-60 also. But I said, you made an 89, and I made a 43, and I know that you're not twice as smart as I am. Of course, I found out later that Keith probably was, and probably still is, twice as smart as I am. But it's kind of an interesting story from the standpoint of Mr. Fuller being an outstanding teacher. It just so happened that I had a difficult time understanding plain geometry in second year algebra, and Keith didn't. There were other outstanding teachers in those days at Foley as well. But I think the ones who maybe made the most impact on me, even though certainly all of those teachers made a big impact on me in a number of ways, some that I recounted, and there are others that I just failed to mention at this point. Maybe I can recall them later on. But during those days, of course, my main interest in life really was sports. I loved playing football, basketball, and baseball, and we had some excellent coaches at Foley. Of course, the main one, the head coach at that time, was Coach Ivan Jones. Coach Jones came to Foley. He had actually been an assistant coach in the early 50s and then went back to Jackson for a year or so as an assistant coach, and then came to Foley in 1955 as head coach. Of course, that was a wonderful time for us because even though I think at that time I was in the 5th or 6th grade, later on I would have the opportunity to play for him for 3 years, and he was a big influence in my life at that time and even later on and even still today. At that time we had outstanding football teams. He coached for 14 years, never had a losing team. And during that time, there was a period which most people refer to, I guess, as the golden age of Foley football, at least at that time. Beginning in 1960 through about 1964, we won 47 games and lost 3. In football, there are a lot of serious things, of course, and Coach Jones' practices were always exceptionally tough, hard, long. As a matter of fact, we would always say, even when I played for him and coached for him later on, that we practiced a dark 30 every day. We'd start at 2:20 or 2:30, and it might be 6 or 6:30 or whenever he decided we had enough. But at any rate, one thing that happened one time, there was a kid that got his nose hurt in practice, and he was coming over to Coach Jones, had come over to Coach Jones and said, "Coach, I think I broke my nose." And he was holding his nose and saying, "I think I broke my nose, I think I broke my nose." And so Coach Jones, who had a way with words with us guys, and we totally understood what he wanted us to do in the years that I played for him and coached with him, but Coach Jones said, "Son, is that the same one that you broke last year?" And so that was kind of a funny regarding Coach Jones, and Coach, don't kill me for having said that, having told that story. Those kind of things happen from time to time, and there was one other story that I'll relate. And Coach Jones always believed in what was called board drills. We would have like a 2 by 12. He coached offensive line a lot. He coached everything. He coached offensive line, backs, defense, everything. But he believed in a lot of one-on-one stuff at practice. And so he was teaching the linemen to block and to shed a block, get off the block, and that sort of thing. And so one day the linemen were going one-on-one on the boards. And there was a big hole next to the board. And so one of the boys told Coach Jones, "Coach Jones, there's a big hole right here." He said, looked at the kid and just said, "Well, son, just leave it there." So these are the kind of things, those people that know Coach Jones know that I'm telling that with a lot of respect and admiration for Coach Jones. I'm not poking fun. It was just funny kind of things that happen once in a while. Really and truly, Foley and all of Baldwin County really, and education, it's about relationships, building relationships. It's about people, and it's about making a difference in people's lives. And people like that made a difference in my life, and you get into the profession for that reason, really. And I failed to mention a while ago, even Coach Jones. Later on, I had the opportunity to coach his son, John. Like he coached me, then I coached his son years later. And even years later, Coach Jones is helping my son coach. My son is coaching right now. He coaches the Foley Middle School team and has for several years. Coach Jones, at the age of 81, as I'm speaking today, he'll be 82 in about a month, he's still helping coach. He goes out there every day and helps my son Keith, along with Rusty Henson and Kenny Thomason, coach the Foley Middle School football team.
My days at Foley High School are too good to ever begin to cover in such a short period of time. When I attended Foley High School in 1962 through 1966, those are probably some of the greatest years that anyone could ever have wanted to attend a high school. Foley High School was absolutely a fabulous place to be. Our class consisted of 166 students, and our students were just so close, and to this day we're close. We've had 5-year reunions ever since we've graduated, and are going to celebrate our 60th birthdays together on a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico out of Mobile because we're all so close to this day. I'm one of the fortunate class members to have fallen in love with a beautiful cheerleader in Foley High School and still be married to the same lady 37 years later. Sandy and I were classmates at Foley, and I always tell the story. When I went to Foley High School, I wanted to be the valedictorian of the class, and I quickly found out with all the smart girls in there I couldn't be, so I married the valedictorian of my class. And I found out that's the easiest way, you know, or the closest I could ever get. But Foley High School was truly a great school back then, and I guess one of the neatest things is that we all were such close friends, and a lot of things focused around the athletics in the school because that was not just the school activity that garnered so much interest, it was the community activity. So when the Foley High School team would play on a Friday night, almost every home game we would have 5,000 to 6,000 people. It'd be standing room only. And the next day when the football players would come in to watch the films, afterwards we'd go to Wright's drugstore or Stacy's drugstore, and the old timers in town would come in and talk to us about the game from the night before. I had the privilege of playing on 4 ranked state teams, 1 state championship one year. The next year we were 3rd in the state, 6th in the state, and 8th in the state, and we lost 4 games in 4 years. So much centered around the sports activities, and we just really enjoyed that aspect of the high school. Some of the funniest things that happened also happened around high school, and had the pleasure of playing football with the pro athlete of the world, a guy named Kenny Stabler. A lot of people don't know that, but our Foley High graduate in 1964, Snake Stabler became the pro athlete of the world besides the Super Bowl champion athlete. And I remember one of the funniest things, some of the funniest things that happened, where Snake always had a way of getting the rest of us in trouble. He was such a great athlete, he could get away with things the rest of us couldn't. And when we'd be having these team meetings, there are only 38 of us on the team, he'd sneak around behind Coach Jones and start making all these funny faces and everything, while Coach Jones was so intently lecturing us on pride and all of that, and Snake would be back there, you know, and doing all these gyrations, and we'd have to be sitting there steadily looking at Coach Jones. And I remember one day I just burst out laughing. I just couldn't hold it any longer, and Coach Jones right then made me break down and do some agilities right there and then run laps. I had to run 10 laps that particular day because of what Snake did. But one of the funniest football games that I always remember was going over to Viger. And back when we played football, we all got on one bus with our gear. We only took one bus. And several games, our head football coach, Coach Jones, drove the bus. And I'll never forget going to a Viger game one year on the old causeway, and we were all scared to death. It's amazing we could play football after having ridden the bus with Coach Jones driving, because he was a fabulous coach, but he was not a very good bus driver. And we were all on that bus, and we were going for this big game, and we were crossing the old causeway bridge that's so narrow, the steel bridge, and he got so far over on the line that our bus mirror hit a trailer truck bus mirror, and it went kapang like that, and Snake all around. He says, we had a wreck, hit the floor. And we all hit the floor. I don't know why we did that, and I don't know why Snake told us to hit the floor, because we were all perfectly safe. But he drove a little further, and Coach Jones pulled off the side of the road, and he said, boys, just settle down. We're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. But the other thing that was funny that happened back then is Viger was such a competitor of ours, and unfortunately they beat us a few times. But when we got over to the one year of the game, I'll never forget, and again, we were all on one bus and had our gear on there, Coach Jones made us put on our helmets and our shoulder pads before we got off the bus. And so the whole team starts getting off the bus, and as we're getting off the bus, walking up into the stadium, the Viger Stadium, we start hearing these ping, 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 and we wonder what it is, and it was the rocks that the Viger fans were throwing at us, and they were hitting our helmets and bouncing off. And he got us over there, and they didn't provide us with a dressing room. We just had to huddle out there, and he got us down there, and he kind of started breaking down. He said, "Boys, I told you this is why you need to have your headgear on, because you never know when some foreign object might come flying at you." And it was snake. I'll just never forget that as long as I live. And that probably is one of the reasons we never could beat Viger, because Coach Jones had us so psyched up. But anyways. That's why you'll never forget the memories of playing football with Coach Jones, and also Coach Hollis. We had a coach named Iron Man Tompkins, and I think Snake named him Iron Man because he was the first coach that we had that really taught us how to use weights. Coach Jones, we didn't have the weight machines back then. Coach Jones believed in the actual old weights, and Iron Man Tompkins came in from Troy. He never said a word, and he was quite muscular, and he really made us work out with weights. And of course, Snake never worked out with weights, and wisely so, because he was the quarterback, but he would always be there cheering us on as we worked out. But we had Coach Hollis. Coach Hollis was, by the way, you hear a lot of stories, Coach Hollis is the one that gave the nickname the Snake Stabler. As he weaved through that game, was so remarkable. He's the one that named him Snake. And we had Coach Kelly. And fortunately, we still have all our coaches still living from high school, which is a great memory for us.
The athletic field today is still adjacent to the middle school campus building today. And recently, the community requested that the school board name the stadium for Coach Ivan Jones. Anyone who has gone to school in Foley or lived in Foley or knows anybody from Foley knows of the heritage that Ivan Jones has created in the Foley Public School athletic program.
When I came in 1952, I coached the junior high basketball, and out of those 8th and 9th graders, I think we had 12 kids on the roster that played in the championship game of the junior high championship, and they were juniors and seniors. We had 11 of them playing football, on the football team, and out of this 11, 6 of them played college, and 2 of them later played pro football. Bobby Lauder played at Auburn, and Billy Walker went to Alabama. Bubba Merritt went to Troy. Richard Worth and Raymond Christensen went to Southeastern Mississippi Junior College. And Danny Mastrine also played junior college ball, and later at a school in Louisiana. This was the nucleus of the 1955 team, the first year that I became head coach, which we had a great year, went 9-1. Viger beat us, but we later came back and beat McGill, who were the city champions of Mobile here on this field, and that was a real great year, and also beginning from 1960 through 64, we went 47 out of 50, which was a great run. We had 2 undefeated seasons, 1961 and 2, and 3 9-1 seasons, and had some great kids, and we had off of 61 team, I think we had about 4 or 5 kids to sign Division I scholarships, and we had off the 62 team, we had several more to sign, which was two great classes right together. And I guess they are the most famous or renowned from the standpoint of course, Kenny Stabler was on the 61 and 62 team and was a quarterback. Lester Smith was a quarterback on the 61 team, and Kenny was on the 62 and 63 ball club. And those and of course we also had some fond memories of the other teams, and we're not but those two classes, 61 and 2, probably as far as talent, all being in one right together, is probably the most talent that I had during that time. But had many other teams. Of course, in basketball, I think in 1957, 58, the basketball team was seated #1 in the district here, and we've had several teams to make the playoffs in baseball, and as long as I was coaching, we did not. Well, they started the football playoffs. I think it was the last year that I coached, and at that time, I believe it was only 4 teams from the whole state that got to go to the state, and of course, Fairhope was one of those, and we tied Fairhope that year, for the county, and of course, many more teams go today, but it has really grown. Probably one of the best things that we ever did here, or Coach Wyatt started, was this. I think it was the second year I was here. He started a track program, which helped. I helped a lot, and then about the same time, we Mr. L.W. Brannon gave us a set of weights, and Coach Wise had them, all welded together on one time, and that was the beginning of the weight program here at Foley High School. I was about 1953 or 4 that I know Mr. Brannon, I think, gave them to us in 1953, and of course, you should see the weight program that they have today, the equipment, and down at the high school. It's really something to see, and I think football has changed a lot in some ways. Back then, we're definitely a more pass-oriented, and we used to, but of course Stabler did a pretty good job when he was here. As also Coach Smith was a great passer, and mentioned Bubba Merritt, who was one of the 6 off of that basketball team. Went to the New York, played at Troy and made Little All-American. Went to Troy, and from there he was drafted by the New York Giants, and he spent a couple of years with them, and later wound up with the Canadian in the Canadian Football League with Toronto, I believe, and so we've had 2 professional quarterbacks from Foley, which I was privileged to coach in high school. getting back to Stabler, a lot of people want to know how he got the name Snake. When he was I believe freshman, a sophomore here, he was playing in a game, and he ran back a punt or play like that, and he weaved, all down the field. He must have had about 60 yards for a touchdown, but he must have run close to 100 just weaving from in and out. And then Coach Hollis at that time, who was the junior high coach, said he looks like a snake, and it just stuck after then. The kidding him about looking like a snake. So that's how that story originated. Just say advice I have to, whether teachers, coaches, administrators, or what have you. An educator told me one time about the kids coming up. Says, be nice to them. You may meet them on the way back down. If you're on the top of the mountain, you may meet them on the way back down. And of course, I try to treat everybody fairly, with respect, and encourage them every way I can. In football, we used to say we wanted you to be a competitor on the field and also in the classroom, because my high school coach used to say you can't eat it once you get through, and which I think is a lot of truth in that, and use it as a stepping stone instead of an end in itself.
I was born and raised in Foley. My father was chief of police there for 34 years, so that made life rather interesting, not to mention school. But when I went to school in first grade, I had Miss Southern. It was her very first year to teach. She was right out of college, and the thing I remember most about Miss Southern, aside from growing to love her, was that she gave me my one and only spanking in school. And she popped me in the hand one day for talking during rest period. I don't think that I really ever quit talking, but I cried forever the day that she spanked me, and I never got another spanking. And of course went to Foley Elementary School for 6 years. In third grade, I had Miss Bryant for a teacher. The thing I remember about Miss Bryant, she was very strict on us, but she walked up and down the hall and carried a yardstick. And we were petrified of her, just petrified. But she was an excellent, excellent teacher. Of course, I really wanted to be in Miss Knowles' room because Miss Knowles played the piano and the kids got to sing every day. And since I loved music more than anything, that's what I wanted. Instead, I had Miss Bryan, and I can tell you I learned a great deal of math. Excellent teacher. In the fourth grade, I think, was not too eventful. In the fifth grade, we had a teacher named Miss Miller, and the most memorable thing about fifth grade was learning to square dance. And the first time that we did a play. We did a Thanksgiving play that she had written, and then of course we did sort of a shortened version of A Christmas Carol at Christmas time, and I fell in love with drama in fifth grade thanks to Miss Bryant. The thing I remember the most about sixth grade, I had a teacher named Miss Griffiths. And Miss Griffiths introduced us to cultural education in the sixth grade, that we had to learn about all different countries. And one day we had the most fascinating story on Mexico. And she taught us all the stuff about their history, but as well as she taught us about their foods. And she introduced us to this dish called fried bananas. I thought that would be just the greatest thing in the world. I mean, I loved bananas, and who wouldn't like them fried, right? So a friend of mine and I went home that afternoon. We took a banana, we peeled it, we put Crisco in a frying pan and attempted to fry bananas. They were awful. They were absolutely awful. We told Miss Griffiths the next day of what we had tried to do and how terrible the food was, and she said if we had done it appropriately, we would have enjoyed it. But I must admit that to this day, I've really never tried fried bananas again. In the 7th grade, our lives really changed because at Foley, in 7th grade, you went over to the high school campus. And 7th through the 12th grade was all on one big campus. And even though you were, I guess, somewhat considered junior high, you really were a part of the whole school. So you intermingled with the older students who were seniors, juniors, sophomores, ate at the same time, and those older students began to have a big influence on your life. And we started thinking, I think, at that time more seriously about the kinds of impact our teachers were having. In the 7th grade, we had Miss Lawrence as a science teacher. And there was a very old building on the Foley High School campus at that time that was up on the front corner. It was a big 2-story building. And the 7th and 8th grade classes were in that building. And so we had 7th grade science in that building with Miss Lawrence, who had considered on one day not allowing us to do an experiment because we had a tendency to blow things up, which we'd already done once or twice. But she, of course, let us do the experiment, but she did warn us, but we needed to stop blowing things up. The other thing I remember a lot about that 2-story building was that the arts were taught there as well, music and art. And Coach Jones' wife, Julia, who was Julia Bristow at the time, was new to our school, and she was teaching art in one of the rooms there. And it wasn't a matter of just taking rulers and construction paper and creating, you know, tiny little things. She really had them with easels and huge art pads and was really teaching people to draw, and it was quite fascinating to be introduced to all that. Mr. Stoddard, Ted Stoddard, taught chorus in that building, and I really liked Mr. Stoddard and remember him well. A girlfriend of mine, her name was Cheryl Jackson at the time, Cheryl Lowry, she and I made the varsity chorus the year we were in the 7th grade. We had to try out for it, and we were so proud of ourselves because we could sing good enough to be with the varsity chorus. And it was a great experience, and music has stayed with me the rest of my life, and I attribute that to the experiences that I had at Foley High School and the music teachers there. Also in that 2-story building, there was band. I never did sign up for band. I just recall it being very loud while we were trying to sing over it. But it was a great old building, and we had a lot of enjoyment in that building. And I was sorry the year that it had to be torn down, and they built the library on that campus now, where that old building used to stand. But it was fun to sit out on the building. It had huge steps, had a great architecture style, and we used to sit out on those steps, and I remember those days. In the 7th grade, we also had a teacher named Miss Newman. She was an English teacher. Once you had Miss Newman, you never needed grammar or sentence mechanics or punctuation ever again, and indeed I didn't. She taught us grammar in the 7th grade, and I mean really taught us, and you had to know it. And if you were cutting up or you were not paying attention, and this never happened to me, thank goodness, but she would walk around up and down the rows and look at what you were doing, and if you were off task or you were not doing your lesson right, she would grab the ear of the student and pull on it. And I remember one day she pulled the ear of a boy in front of me, and I just remember thinking, ooh, I don't ever want to do what it was he was doing. So, but she was an excellent teacher, and we really learned a lot from her, and she was very influential in my life. She and another English teacher that I had my senior year, her name was Catherine Jones, and Miss Jones made literature come alive in her class. It was as if the characters in the stories got up and walked around the room. And I attribute the fact that I became an English teacher to both Miss Newman and Miss Jones, because they taught us not only to appreciate it and what the written word could do, but the enjoyment that it could bring. And I thought, that is really the job of a teacher. And it was what I wanted to do once I became a teacher. I wanted to get the lesson across, to understand the need and the seriousness of it, but at the same time, to teach my students to learn to enjoy it, because it could bring so much to you, you know, the rest of your life. Reading is not something you do just as a student. You do that for enjoyment and for self-growth throughout your life. And so I wanted to do that for my students, and that's one of the reasons I became a teacher. If I only had to name one teacher in high school that made the biggest impression on me, I would have to say that it was Beverly Manick. Ms. Manick was the PE teacher, and she entered our lives the year we went into the 7th grade. And this was the early 60s. I graduated from Foley in 1967. So I would say that Ms. Manick entered our lives around 60 or 61. And she began, and of course at that time, the PE classes were segregated. All the girls were in one class and all the boys in another. So Ms. Manick just had girls. And she really began to teach us in the early 60s how to have aspirations for your life other than perhaps what had been expected of women in the past. And through that PE class, where she accepted no excuse for you not participating or not dressing out or not playing or going outside. I mean, if we said to Miss Manick, oh, it's too cold, we can't go outside, she said, we're going outside anyway. If we said to Ms. Manick, well, I just don't feel very good today, I don't think I want to participate in PE, she said, get up on the floor, you're participating anyway. And although that may have seemed harsh, she actually introduced us to a period of time and to a learning experience of not making excuses or not because you were a woman or a lady. And she then began to instill in us the fact that even though we were young women, we could do anything we wanted to do in our lives. And she talked to us about going to college. She talked about careers that had in the past normally been held by men, and told us that if we aspired to those professions, then go to college or go to technical school or go wherever we needed to go to get the skill necessary to do the job, and then do it. And so we began to be very unafraid and very bold in what we thought we would do with our future. Certainly, perhaps not every girl did, but I know I did. And she influenced me greatly in that regard. And is another strong reason that I became a teacher. I taught for 21 years in the classroom. And upon the retiring of Lester Smith, who was principal at the time, the assistant principal, or the principal at the middle school, Mr. Pettibone, became the principal at Foley High School then, which left an assistant principal position open. And Mr. Pettibone came to me because he knew I had the degree and asked me if I wanted to be an assistant principal. And I don't mind telling you that I was petrified at first at the thought, because in a high school in Baldwin County at that time, we'd never had a woman assistant principal. And I thought, you know, this is a very challenging job. This is a very demanding job. But I will tell you that my mind also flashed back to the days of Beverly Manick and those PE classes of being told, you prepare yourself to do a job and then you do it. And so I told Mr. Pettibone, yes, I thought I wanted to do the job. And I began that job and I really loved it. I was an assistant principal then for 4 years at Foley. And after leaving there, I became principal at Fairhope High School for 7 years. And then in '04 was promoted to this position, assistant superintendent. And I will tell you that in each of those positions in Baldwin County, I was the first woman to ever hold them. The first woman to be an assistant principal at a high school, the first woman to be a principal of a high school, and the first woman to be an assistant superintendent of a large region in the school system. And although, you know, I certainly feel fortunate and blessed to have had the opportunity, I was also very fortunate to have the support and the teachers in the past that gave me the direction and the confidence to pursue those kinds of things, and I attribute that to them. When I was a student, I think too, as far as some really lighthearted things that go, one of the funniest things that I remember about Foley High School, which was full of tradition. Everything about Foley High School was full of tradition. There was a particular time when you were allowed to participate in certain events, and a particular time when you had reached an age you were allowed to go to a particular dance. And there was also a very big tradition around becoming a senior. And believe it or not, that tradition was referred to as Kids' Day. It was the last day seniors of a class were on campus in school. And they really weren't there the whole day, because you came to school dressed like a kid, much younger, with your bathing suit on underneath. We loaded into huge pickup trucks and any other kind of truck that could haul us all, and our senior sponsors and teachers, and we went down to Gulf Shores for a day at the beach, and we stayed all day long. Now, we had a place on Foley High School's campus that we always had that was called Senior Lawn. And it was a grassy area in the very center of the school, and nobody could walk on it but seniors. And if an underclassman stepped on it, then they got hit with a book for every boy that was standing on the senior lawn at the time, or something like that. But while the seniors were away at Kids' Day, the juniors actually took possession of the senior lawn and became the next class.
We had another sport at Foley High School which I think enticed everybody to join. That is the field day sports, which they had an opportunity for all students to participate. And one of them was chinning. Get out of the bar and chin up and down, and that was one of the main sports that I entered into all the time, and see how many times you could chin. And I believe 32 was the most that we had anybody do. But the school activities was one of the main places to enjoy your time here in Foley. You had to pay a tuition fee when I went to school. I don't know about Austin, but I went to school. And the only way we could pay that tuition was we'd have to haul wood to the school in order to heat the school. They didn't have natural gas or any other way. It was all heated by wood. And so we paid our tuition that way by bringing logs and so forth, cutting them up, bring them down there so they could heat the school. And also they didn't have buses. And we lived about 3 miles out of school, out of Foley. And we had to walk to school. And by the good nature of the fellow by the name of Judge Stelk, who engineered a lot of the property, real estate sales here, his son went to school, had an old Model T Ford, and he would pick up a bunch of the people on the road to come to school. And that's the only transportation we really had coming to school. Remember that? And also, another thing, there was a little creek across the road. It was a dirt road, and a little creek between our home and a road highway, 59, which was not paved. But going through the creek, going to school was kind of odd, so we had to take off our shoes and socks and wade through the creek when it was raining, and then put our shoes and socks back on so we could walk the rest of the way. But we did that, more or less, going to school for several years. I went to school with a two-story building, which they had classes in the first floor and classes in the second. And I believe it was through the sixth grade that these classes were held in this two-story building in the front. Then after that, they had the other schools on the side. But my wife's aunt happened to be the sixth grade teacher at that time. And of course, I didn't know that at the time, but later on I found that out. And she was quite interesting in all of her conversation about school. But I think the most interesting thing is we had a teacher from Atmore, Alabama, by the name of McConnell. And one thing she always had, she had her glasses, and she always would take them and put them up. And she always got us to sing songs in class when we started class. And it was quite interesting, but she was a wonderful lady. Other than that, I got our Latin teacher, which is not ever mentioned in the book, was Addie Townsend. And she taught us Latin. And it's quite interesting, too, that we learn to speak Latin, or interpret Latin, more or less, in that respect. And other was Louis Alexander, and about 10 years ago, no more than that, about 30 years ago, someone called me and said, somebody wants to see you. And she was traveling through here, and she came into the office where I was working and said, you don't probably remember me, do you? I said, I don't know. She said, well, I was your English teacher. And it's quite interesting. She was just traveling through.
I came to Foley High School when I was in the 9th grade. I was born in Indiana. We moved down to Pigott Beach, and they finally got a school bus. My dad had to bring us up here the first year and stay all day long and wait on us to get out of school and take us back home. But we finally got a school bus, and like Paul said, or one of you said before, our bridge kept breaking down. It was all dirt roads then. The bridge kept breaking down, and we had to take our shoes off and wade across the water. My dad would bring us up to meet the bus on the car, and then we'd wade across the water to get to school, dry our feet off and put our shoes back on. Then he'd meet the bus every afternoon when it came back. But we only did that for a couple of weeks till they fixed the bridge. But when I came to Foley School, I went to the building that's there now, that's the intermediate school, and that was our high school. And like somebody else said, our biggest day was Armistice Day, when we had our Armistice Day, because Bay Minette was the only county and the only city in the county that had a band. And of course, that was just great for us to have a band, because everything we had, we didn't have a band for it. There was a boy named, oh, I forgot his name now, Baron Field, that started a Foley band later, but we didn't have a band then. And there wasn't any lights at the football field, so of course all the games were played in the daytime. And our biggest day was Armistice Day Parade, when we had our homecoming. We crowned our homecoming queen. And J.W. Crosby was the first one to ever announce the football games. And then we had stands that were about 3 feet high, and he'd walk back and forth between the stands in the dirt, announce the football games. his graduating class in 1939 gave him a PA system, and but there wasn't any place to plug it in, so he had to go across the alley, the man's house, Gene Lenz's house, and plug in his PA system to announce the games. And I was a cheerleader, so that's how we met, and we finally married later. But he ended up announcing games for over 60 years at the high school, and that was our biggest day. But the brick building is still there, was our home economics building. And Mrs. Terrell, Louise Terrell, was our home economics teacher. And we cooked and sewed and did everything over there. One week out of the year, we'd exchange with the boys. Half the building was agricultural building. So we'd go in the agriculture building and we'd have to make something. And they'd have to go over to our building and do some sewing. So all the boys used to laugh about different things that they made out of cloth over at the agriculture building. But it was a real active, it's a big class. We were all standing in the hall one day changing classes when they announced World War II over the loudspeaker. And almost all the boys were drafted out of our class. I don't think there was half of them left. So after the war, they told them that they could all come back and go to school and they could graduate for 2 or 3 months. And I know a lot of them that did that, and they got their diploma from high school. About one boy I was talking to, Clifford Calloway, just got his diploma a couple of years ago. He's my age. So a lot of them did come back and get the diplomas that didn't. But they were drafted out of high school. They were seniors and weren't allowed to graduate.
I started Foley High School in 1931. And of course, there wasn't many paved roads around town at that time or anything else, really. And of course, we're sitting in this wonderful building today that's been here at the depot as long as I can remember, because I was born about 300 feet across the street from the depot. And my father had a general store at the main intersection of Foley. And we lived upstairs there. And so we weren't too far from the high school in Foley. And I've seen a lot of changes in South Baldwin County, and particularly in the school system. And I remember back when the early days when Mr. Lewis was principal. Mr. Lewis, and then later on after Mr. Lewis, why, Mr. O.P. South was principal of Foley School, and later on, why, Mr. Bennett, before Mr. South was Mr. Fraley. He followed Mr. Lewis. Mr. Fraley followed Mr. Lewis, and then Mr. Percy South, O.P. South, and after that was Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett died while, I guess about 1940 or a little before that, and Mr. Hadley moved down from, Dr. Hadley was principal of Summerdale, like Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett was Summerdale, and then he moved to Foley, and of course then Mr. Hadley, after Mr. Bennett's death, Mr. Hadley was principal at Foley. And later on, of course, after Mr. Hadley was Mr. McGowan and W.C. McGowan, and of course Leslie Smith, I guess, followed Mr. McGowan. Likewise, Mr. McGowan was superintendent after Mr. Tharp. Mr. S.M. Tharp was superintendent of Baldwin County Education. But my father not only served on the school board here in Foley, he served on the county school board for I don't know how many years, but until Max Griffin took his place. in Baldwin County school system. And my mother used to be real active in the PTA. And that was a big thing back in the early days with the Parents Teachers Association. And that's when everyone in town just about turned out to see what was happening at the school. The school was really the main function of the whole community in the early days of all the communities, I would say. But if anything went on, it was all the meetings were held at the schoolhouse or in the auditoriums at the school. And that was our entertainment, whether it was baseball or basketball or football.
I transferred to Foley High School from Bon Secours in the late 30s. And we left Bon Secours School in the 7th grade and went to Foley in the 8th. Immediately, I was just loved by everybody, I felt. And I was so happy to be there. We had lockers. We didn't have that in Bon Secours. And it was just a new area to become acquainted with. At first, I did not like being in one room and then another room. But it was an exciting time. I was nominated to be in the beauty pageant, not knowing really what the beauty pageant was, and I won. I met this gentleman. He was sitting across the road, a young student, was sitting across the room from me, and he could wiggle the top of his forehead. It was very intriguing to me. And of course, he became the husband of my 7 children, and also a hero at Foley High School in football. He could run faster than anybody, and I don't believe anybody's beat his record. He was the love of my life, and they entered me in the contest another time at the Foley High School, and I won as a beauty queen again. The girls could, if they could get an evening gown, anybody could be in the beauty pageant. So to really say that wasn't too much of a exciting thing to know that you were there with all these girls. But anyway, it was exciting to me in my lifetime and my children. I have 7 children, and they all went to Foley High School, cheerleaders, head cheerleaders, captains of the cheerleaders, and the son played football like his daddy, and he was also very fast and very good football player. The years went on, and I had my 7 children to keep me happy and involved in the school. Always a homeroom mother. They said I made good cookies. And then we had a new school built in Foley, and we had a great 2-day or whole week celebration for it. And I was the president and chairman of this celebration. Gould Beach had thought that he was the one that thought it would be a great thing to do. And so we had, Foley was just, had parades and the alumni parade, and we had cars, bands of former students, and we all came together on the night of the dedication and the day of the dedication of the new school, which is an asset and a beauty here in Foley. One of the funny things that I think would be interesting in Foley was my brother-in-law was 7 years old, and there was no school buses to come to bring the children to school. So his father had a Model A or T, and he drove that bus with his brothers and sisters to school every day. And it's been told that he would get out there at recess and make donuts on the playground. So, you know, just imagine what would happen today if a 7-year-old got in a car and even was sitting in it at the school. So I have to tell you, I was leaving my part out. I was the captain of the cheerleaders for 2 years. We were orange and blue at the time of 1920s because the yearbook was called the Satsuma. We raised Satsumas in this area before the trees were frozen, And so it was called Satsuma. The school, as you know, was also called the Baldwin County Agriculture School or something similar to that. But we were very proud that we became, during the war, I was told the reason we couldn't get the color orange because of the parachutes used the color, and we became blue and gold. In 1927, I sat in what is now the gift horse and watched my brother graduate from high school. It was called the Progressive Hall when it was built, and all activities were there. Even the basketball games were played in the Progressive Hall. The school used it as an auditorium, and it was an exciting time. And I know it was May the 25th in 1927, because when I got home, I had a baby sister. So I've never forgotten that that was the happy time there in that hall. After that, it was still used for the basketball games, and my brother had received a scholarship from Auburn to go play basketball. But you can imagine what was happening in 29 and 28 and 27. We had the Depression. My father owned the Standard Oil business in Foley, and people couldn't pay him for gas, so he couldn't send my brother to Auburn. He went to work for the U.S. Corps of Engineers. But those were the things that I remember about the basketball. It was before the football. When they finally started the football team, my brother went from business and business and asked for a donation so they could get helmets and to wear for the football team, because they were playing barefooted and with no helmet. And his coach said, "You take that $5 he gave you back. He needs it worse than we do." So they played football with no helmets and no shoes. Glad to be a football player. So that was the beginning of the football team in Foley in 1926, I imagine, because he graduated in 27. But the other tale about him, he wanted to go to Foley School from Botsecure, and there was no bus. So there was a bus on this other side of the river, so he asked the bus driver, could he and Dwight Steele go to school in Foley and ride the bus? He said, "I have no room, but if you want to ride the running boards, I'll let you go." But my brother rode a horse up to Steele's Landing, rode a boat across the river, and caught the bus to come to Foley High School. He's the one that played basketball and won the scholarship. So there's so many little things like that, like my sister going to Foley School. My daddy rented a room, and she and a friend lived in the room to go to school. Now this is between 23 and 27. I think she graduated in 25. And they had a pot-bellied stove, and my daddy brought them wood because they had to cook on it and heat with it to go to school in Foley. So you know, it wasn't so easy to be a student and go to school at Foley High School in 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. About the worst thing I can think of school, it was so free in Foley School at the time that a 7-year-old could drive a car. We could use the bus to go to our events. Gas was so cheap, I guess. We were just almost free to be free with each other on the playgrounds or anything like that. I will tell you something though, that my husband, that was the hero football player, I was so in love with him that my family wanted me to go with other boys and not be one. And so there was this young man, his daddy was a mail carrier and he had a car, and he was so, everybody didn't go, he asked people to go with us. We double dated because of the transportation, double dated, triple dated. And we could go and have drink for a nickel, that's all we cared about, hot dog for a nickel somewhere. But anyway, my husband didn't have the money to go to the show one day, and so this young man asked me to go to the show with him. And when he came back, we rounded the big auditorium, and Cecil was standing there. He beat him up at the school. I don't think anything ever came of it except that they just laughed about it. And that's why I said we were so free in those days at Foley High School that even my children, I hate to tell them how it was. And we had to bring our lunch. There was no cafeteria. There was no place to buy a drink. You drank water. And we were happy to do that. There was, everybody ate their lunches in the rooms. And so it was just I guess that it was one thing, we were so close to each other and knew each other, and probably 50 graduated at that time, maybe not even that many, that we were like a family there at Foley High School.
Pleasant memories of Foley. The people there were so supportive. And I had some unique opportunities there. As a teacher in high school, I was able to pick up children that I had previously taught in the 5th grade at Alberta before World War II. And I was able to take those kids at the junior high level, and then in those 7 years, I went up in the teaching structure. I started out teaching junior high school math and science, and I wound up teaching senior high school math and science with those same kids, some of whom I had taught at the 5th grade level. And then again at the junior high, and then each year as they went up, I was able to take those kids through high school. It was an opportunity that few teachers ever have, to take a kid from 5th grade through advanced mathematics and physics in high school. And those children became my personal friends, to whom I was closer than to people of my own age. And it has remained that way through all the years when we go back to the high school class reunions. These are my personal friends.
An educator told me one time about the kids coming up. He says, be nice to them. You may meet them on the way back down. If you're on the top of the mountain, you may meet them on the way back down. And of course, I try to treat everybody fairly, with respect, and encourage them every way I can. Football, we used to say we wanted you to be a competitor on the field and also in the classroom, because my high school coach used to say you can't eat it once you get through.